Walker is the Executive Director of ConservAmerica, which works to educate the public and elected officials on conservative approaches to today's environmental, energy, and conservation challenges. Walker brings incredible depth of experience in public policy, energy, and capital markets to ConservAmerica. Since 2008, Walker has been president and owner of Insight Consulting, LLC. He has served on the staff of Congressman John J. Rhodes III and within the Department of Gaming for the state of Arizona as Legislative Liaison and Public Information Officer. Walker served 5 years in the Arizona Army National Guard and attained the rank of captain. Mr. Walker is joined by Trammell, the Executive Director of Earth Day, Texas, Rod Richardson, President of the Grace Richardson Fund, and Aaron Berger, Co-Chairman, Nexus Working Group on Climate Change and the International Advisor for the U.S. Climate Plan. Let's welcome the next panel.
Thank you all very much. Ms. Beattie was not able to make it, so I'm happy to fill in. I was intrigued when I saw the title of this panel and spoke with all of the other panelists about it to see if they had the same reaction I did. And in fact, they did. And to understand that, I'm very, very briefly going to do a little synopsis of Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow, Nobel Prize-winning economist. Many books, but Thinking Fast and Slow, the big idea is that human brains have two systems, right? Sort of an autopilot setting and a conscious thought setting. Probably half of the room right now is in autopilot mode, which is what you should be, right? Because you've been to 100 conferences and you've heard thousands of panelists all speak. So your brain has it on autopilot and it's waiting to see if anybody says something that shocks you or intrigues you enough for the conscious mind to kick in. And that has a significant level of importance when you think about communication, right? Because the autopilot is always on, it's going to be the first system that weighs a word or phrase or demeanor. And it's going to use intuition to make some decisions about that, and that leads to biases. So Kahneman has a prescription, and you know, the last phrase, it's easier to recognize other people's mistakes than our own. Usually, that sort of phrase is conceived as like a bad thing, right? We're blind to our own self. But what I think is there's an opportunity here for most of the people in the room who are probably not conservatives to actually recognize that we conservatives, we're going to hear these words and it's going to go through the autopilot and it's going to trigger certain intuitive thoughts that are going to lead to biases. And if you're aware that sometimes the words that the progressives use mean something entirely different to us, then perhaps you would consider looking at it a different way, using maybe a different word to get to the same point. And that really is the key takeaway, because everyone on this panel, there's 3 Republicans up here and 1 independent, Aaron, whose job is to figure out how to talk to the other 3 of us and our friends. So as was briefly mentioned in the bio, I've worked for a congressman, a governor, public utility commissioner, spent 5 years on Wall Street, worked with utilities for 15 years. And we hear things in a different way. The green agenda. This is a website, green-agenda.com. Let's unpack it a little bit. Okay, let's look at this first pullout and the second pullout. Here's the first one. And just read that for yourself. But you can see this is a conservative website that says the green agenda is an agenda of fear and control. And then they pull up, and they have a host of different little blurbs they pulled up from 100 different environmental filings. And this is one that they love. The common enemy of humanity is man. In searching for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, right? This is End of the American Dream. You see the headline. The green agenda is about getting rid of as many humans as possible. I don't know that you know that that's what your agenda is. I hope this is erroneous. Otherwise, we're in trouble on the dais. But let's look at one of the pullouts, right? This is what when you say the green agenda to conservatives, right, we go to Republican meetings all the time. Significant percentage of the people in there think this is the green agenda, right? Publicly advocating the end of our freedoms and the establishment of a big brother-style world government. Lastly, Glenn Beck. I'm sure everyone here is a huge fan of Mr. Beck. Full disclosure, I'm not. But this is his book. Citizens have two primary goals. The first is to create clean energy. So this goes on and on and on, right? There is, on both sides of the political spectrum, those silos that exist where people talk to each other. And, you know, Aaron and I were talking about this at dinner last night. You kind of wind up getting increasingly crazy if you just stay completely incestuous with the way you think about things and perceive things. And, you know, I'm not saying it happens on the left, guessing it might, but on the right, I can tell you for sure it does. So what we want to do is really open it up now to everybody. And I'll start with Trammell. Trammell Crow, as most of you know, a very successful commercial real estate history, but he also has, in the state of Texas, a completely red state, has developed Earth Day. And Trammell, I would like you to tell us, when you were building the world's biggest Earth Day exposition in Texas, did you spend a lot of time talking about Mother Earth and climate change and the green agenda?
We started an Earth Day 6 years ago in Dallas, thinking that there were these big expos of environmental groups of all kinds that came together with exhibition on April 22. When we had our first exhibit with 250 exhibits, we learned that we were completely wrong and there weren't such expos for the general public with environmental groups that we know of, really, to any degree. Now we have 1,600 exhibit spaces. We've just pushed this thing a lot, and we started out just naturally with corporations, first environmental groups, corporations, colleges, and government agencies. And it just was a natural thing to do in Texas. So we didn't consciously trumpet the business and the environment. We did intuitively know not to talk about global warming very loudly if you wanted people to come, you know? And in fact, we went 4 years without, as show promoters with signs and themes and things like that, we just didn't talk about it at all. Now, the environmental groups did their own thing. But what came to us from all these participants and involved parties was exactly this theme. It's, oh my God, we have business and environment. We said, yeah, you know, isn't that how you get things done? But ever since that time, all of these 6 shows, it's been kind of an amazement to newcomers and a continued theme, almost as if it's unique. I don't think it is anymore. I see it in publications all the time. To me, it almost seems like old hat. But I think that we still need, the environmental community still needs to learn how to talk to conservatives. And most business guys are conservatives. To say global warming, what's the point? To say green agenda means hidden agenda. So that's just happened of its own accord in our experience.
And Rod, go to you next. You and I think both talked to a lot of congressional members. I was talking to a friend last week, Republican conservative member of the House, and he said, you know, I'm always willing to talk to the environmental groups. But he said they don't realize, oftentimes they come into my office, and within the first 5 minutes, they've said 10 different things about the Republicans being, you know, in a cave or not intelligent or anti-science or what do you think in your experience? I mean, talking with members, talking with people in the business community, Do you run into that sort of feedback as well?
Well, you know, the problem with the words that environmentalists use is it's not really a problem with words, it's a problem with the ideas. See, the problem with the words is that they don't describe a conservative agenda. They don't describe conservative policies. They describe liberal left-wing policies. When you talk about, you know, here's some words that really piss off conservatives. Tax, right? So if you're going to talk about a carbon tax, you pissed off the conservatives right there, okay? If you want to use tax, follow it with tax cuts or tax rate cuts. Then you'll get their attention. Similarly, if you want to use subsidies or regulation, you're going to tick them off. If you want to use regulation, be sure to precede it with the syllable D, as in deregulation, because they'll listen to that. The problem is that so much of the way that the environmental movement has tried to talk to conservatives is to try to convince conservatives to buy into what they perceive as basically a left-wing agenda, right? And the policies, you know, when you look at it, you have carbon tax, subsidies, regulation as the principal policies that support the climate change, mitigation. And there are a few hybrids like cap and trade and things like that. But these are perceived by conservatives as supporting higher taxes, supporting higher spending, and then supporting bigger government. So, you know, I believe that global warming is real. You know, I believe that the proper thing to do, if you're going to try to convince conservatives, is to convince them using conservative policies, right? Now, how would you do that? I'll be talking later this afternoon at fuller length about this, but the Grace Richardson Fund is involved in developing a new idea called clean tax cuts. Clean tax cuts is the idea that with the growing profitability of wind and solar, unsubsidized profitability that you now have as of 2015, and indeed profits in other areas of the clean tech industry like hybrid cars, possibly maybe electric cars will be in that category, LED light bulbs, efficiency, that actually tax cuts make sense. You can actually apply Reaganomics to climate change. You can apply supply-side tax cuts to climate change. So if you actually apply a conservative policy to the problem, you're going to have a lot more success talking to conservatives, I think. So it's not just the language, it's the ideas and the mindset. The other point I'd like to make is that, you know, because so many conservatives don't believe climate change is real, it makes a lot of sense. If you're going to have a successful climate change policy, it better make sense whether or not climate change is real, right? You want to be able to present a policy that makes sense, you know, whether climate change is real or not. You want to, you know, there needs to be a boost to the economy. There needs to be other benefits: clean air, clean water, jobs. So you have to have a package of things that make sense about your policy. You're not just climate alarmism. It's wrong to say that conservatives are anti-science, and that will tick them off too. Especially, you know, people in the neoconservative movement who are you know, very thoughtful people generally. You know, I think that the part that is anti-science should be distinguished from conservatism in general. And that is really the part that's funded by the fossil fuel interests. I mean, that is a private industrial interest that is putting forward an agenda, and it's putting forward an agenda wearing conservative clothing. But it's not really conservatism, and it needs to be distinguished from genuine conservatism. So, but anyway, those are a few thoughts that I would share about, you know, if you want to talk to conservatives, have a genuine policy, make sure it's based in proven conservative policies that have come before, like Reaganomics or supply-side tax cuts, and make sure that the policy makes sense whether or not climate change is real or not.
Rod, that's a really interesting distinction you make between conservatives and big business.
Sure. No, I mean, look, you know, Adam Smith wrote the Bible of conservatism, The Wealth of Nations, you know, which is, you know, we believe in it. But he said, you know, if you ever get, you know, 3 or 4 capitalists in a room together, they will conspire against the public interest. So, you know, if you're a genuine free market capitalist, you have an understanding that, you know, capitalists are your hero, and they're also people you got to watch really carefully. Because
So what did Adam Smith
these guys
say?
are slick.
What did he say to justify the wealth of nations?
What?
What did Smith say to justify a market economy if capitalists would do that?
He said that basically from the self-interest of the few arises the good of the many. You know, the idea of behind capitalism is if people are self-interested, they will work hard to produce goods that they sell to other people because the other people want them, and therefore both people will benefit. Now, in my view, one of the reasons we're interested in the clean tax cuts idea is because if you use the tax code to reward low carbon energy, for instance, and cleaner practices, you can actually tilt the playing field so that capitalism becomes clean capitalism. You can make it ever cleaner, right? If your tax code rewards good practices, you can give the investors an incentive to put pressure on their companies to do the right thing. If the investor's capital gains tax rate, maybe even their estate tax rate, is going to be determined by how clean that company is, there's going to be a lot more investor interest in making sure that the corporate practices are good practices.
Well, let me jump Aaron in here. One of the things that Rod had mentioned was, there is for sure a group, call it a cabal or a conspiracy or just happenstance, but there's a group that is, you know, fomenting climate denial and skepticism and doubt and all of that. Now, my question to you, Aaron, you're a social scientist. So you've got one group messaging to very conservative people that there's sort of a left-wing conspiracy. What have you found in terms of the way conservatives respond to some of the climate words and phrases? It's my hypothesis that we're actually seeding the fields for the skeptics because we're turning off a lot of conservatives with the verbiage and then making them more open to this argument. What have you found?
I mean, well, certainly from the beginning, when I was talking to people, I was telling my folks, both of them very conservative, that I was going to be speaking, what is it going to be on? Conservative values and climate change. If I had mentioned anything about green agenda, those words at all, they would have gone right to the slides that we were showing earlier. But in addition to that kind of social engineering language, we were looking at the different ways that people were communicating, the kinds of topics that people were using. And so the pro-climate camp, their big focus is natural implications, very complicated scientific explanations, and if you don't get this, you're an idiot, right? Great way to turn off anybody, right? Other side of the coin, the denial camp, they are fictitiously putting out that, the economy is going to be impacted in these manner of ways, right? National security for you and the country is going to be impacted in these number of ways. We have to stop this immediately, right? Look at the language in Agenda 21, things like that. We're all very afraid, right, about what might be coming.
Hold on, I dropped my mic and it's making a huge noise.
And so the thing that I found was that I believe that if the pro-climate camp can begin to create communication around things that conservatives actually receive and listen to, economic implications that are already happening, irregular flooding in Florida, irregular snow days in Texas earlier this year, okay, impacts in New York and things like that. They're planning on building a wall because that's going to fix it. You know, in addition to that,
Aaron, wouldn't that come back and haunt you if you're talking about unusual weather? And then they say, oh, this is a real cold day today, and it's April, so I guess there's not such thing.
well, again, and then we'd have to look at the trends that have been going on, right? I think it's every month this month has been the hottest month on record, right? January was the hottest January ever. You got February, March, all the way up until May last month as well. And so, you know, when we go that, we just have to say, well, I mean, you know, the mercury on the ball is going up to here. You know, there's no extra time for that. But anyway, if there was more focus on economic implications and national security implications, in addition to legislative alterations and things like that, reaching out to conservatives, I think that we would be able to get enough to go on and join us there.
Yeah, this slide thing isn't working. Can we hit the next slide? And while we're waiting for that, you know, I think when it comes to marketing, what wins? Chip Heath, Dan Heath had a great book, Made to Stick, and it said, right, for marketing to work, it has to be simple, understandable, concrete, concise, emotional, and sustainable. And so those things have to be in the construct of the person you're talking to. So when it has to be concrete, concise, and emotional, it has to be that to the person you're talking to. You could probably go into the DNC and talk about the need to have more collective action and work together and establish a better subsidy approach and upend the existing economic constructs that we have. It would be a totally different reaction, though, in the RNC. And so these are words that I know from ConservAmerica's standpoint. You know, we worked in 23 congressional races last year, one governor's race, to identify, elect, and then continue to work with Republican climate realists. There are some in the House and a few in the Senate as well, who actually understand the science of it. They don't believe in climate change because they don't believe in gravity. They just understand that these things are indifferent to your belief, right? You step off a building, gravity's indifferent to whether you believe. So there are an increasing number of Republicans that are working on this issue. But this is how we talk to them about it. And so, Rod, you know, you and I had a great debate on tax policy options, but when you look at these words, right, this is what we're talking about, right? Mm-hmm. All of these things, I think, apply specifically, don't they, to renewables?
You know, I think that, you know, those words are great, and, you know, I use innovation, you know, and affordable is fantastic. You know, most Americans, you know, are far more concerned about cheap than they are about clean. You know, so if you want to sell your idea, be sure to include cheap in your wording, because you'll get more listeners interested. So all of these words are great, but, you know, my fundamental point is that, you know, conservatives are you know, more astute than you think, perhaps. You know, and if you're trying to use those words to dress up, you know, carbon taxes, subsidies, or regulations, or tax credits, there's still going to be lingering suspicion that, you know, you're dressing up a wolf in sheep's clothing. So, you know, words are great, but you have to, you know, you know, if you really want to get conservatives into climate change, you have to really think hard about what's a conservative climate change policy. You know, I think that the you know, Wesley Clark's you know, talk was very important, because security, national security, is a road into conservatives, and you know, the fact that you use the word American and independence is key, and you know, speaks to the security concern, which I think is valid and key. But you know, I was telling Trammell earlier, you know, Texas has a very unique situation where it's a highly Republican state, and yet they have fantastic wind and solar resources. So, you know, you have these Republican ranchers, you know, millionaires and billionaires and whatnot, and, you know, they want to put up wind turbines And you know what? They want to get a subsidy for it too. So they'll go talk to their Republican congressman, and lo and behold, the tax credits extension passed last January with the help of the 88 Republicans who have wind and solar projects in their districts. So you've got an entree there, in terms of convincing the Republican Party through those kinds of people.
A profit motive and job.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Texas Republicans are, in particular, and even throughout the whole Southwest, the Republicans throughout the whole Southwest are an entree, and through the wind corridor going up through the center of the country, are an entree to the Republican Party for softening this up. But that's not having to do with language, that has to do with practical politics.
So in the last few minutes, let's maybe get into some of the things that have been achieved from a Republican construct. And Trammell and I worked together with ConservAmerica, and just briefly, a couple things. We were able to move forward in Arizona with what we've called blue-collar solar, which allows the two largest utilities there to actually place solar onto the rooftops of customers, small pilot programs. But it was done with the intent of it being available to people that don't have access to the cash for an upfront purchase, or that don't have a great credit score. And so we called it blue-collar solar. And the idea is then all you need is a rooftop and a phone, and you can get solar on your roof and immediately get a cost savings. We got a school energy efficiency credit put in that allows the utility to pay 100% of the improvement, not just a 30% of the incremental difference between an energy efficient solution and a normal solution, but literally 100% for a disadvantaged school. And the school, the only obligation they have is they have to put all the cost savings back into the classroom. Going forward, we're working on an entirely new approach to solving the net metering problem that General Clark mentioned. And we continue to work with identifying and electing climate realists. Aaron, what are you working on in the next couple of years? What's the focus for you in terms of trying to get some success?
So couching off of that research that we were pulling up, we're working on a grand marketing strategy right now that would be deployed over the next 3 to 5 years. One portion would work with conservative economists to disseminate articles in the Financial Times, Wall Street Journal, things like that, to promote the ideas that here are conservative topics. They are, they're relevant to climate change. These are happening. In addition to that, getting senior military officials to go and also submit articles as well, foreign policy, foreign affairs, to talk about a lot of the things that Greta and General Clark were talking about earlier. The third and most important part, I think, is with Rod and Trammell there, getting solid legislation in there. Legislation that conservatives can be proud of, they can come to the table and talk about it, right? And also they can say, oh, the water is warm over here, it's safe. There's people who aren't with Trump that are going to do reasonable things and bipartisan things. And so that's a strategy that we're working on right now.
And Trammell, Earth Day, Texas, I mean, you said like 130,000 people, I think, showed up. But what about, when I was there, you had a host of Republican elected officials there as well. And it seemed like the entire Texas Chamber of Commerce was there.
It was without much effort. They really, they want to be exposed to it. They want to learn more about it. They want to be seen there. And we had a few from DC, and I think that, frankly, I'm an inveterate salesman. I think there'll be quite a few more next year. So in concert with the Austin Earth Day, we think that we'll have a legislative council every other year, because the Texas session, legislative sessions only happen every other year, thank God. And
so you've made it a safe place then for conservative businessmen and conservative electeds to get together and talk about what the opportunities are, what the challenges are?
Yeah, we've had them say, do not publicize my attendance. But they're there, full view.
Really? So still in the closet, but showing up to the party.
To the top level.
Rod, what do you think you're working on over the next year or two? What are the major Grace Richardson objectives.
Well, with this, the clean tax cuts idea is a newly relevant idea that is keyed off of the increasing profitability of solar and wind. It's suddenly much more relevant now. It's an idea that needs to be studied, it needs to be developed. There's probably a lot of different ways this could be developed. The Breakthrough Institute might want to develop it one way, you guys might want to develop it another way. I'm sure there are people in the room who could think about different ways that, what could we do with tax cuts? But, you know, so right now I'm working with the Jack Kemp Foundation, and you don't get much better conservative credentials than Jack Kemp, working with his son Jimmy on developing this. And we'd love to find additional research partners to work with us. So if anybody is interested in, working with us on developing the clean tax cuts concept, we'd be happy to talk to you.
Brilliant. Well, thank you all. We got through 30 minutes of conservatives talking, and I don't think anybody stormed out. Nothing was thrown. So thank you for that.